Hello everyone, back tuning in to Gazmovies on your Easter Monday. Thanks for tuning in for this Easter Monday. Now, as always at Gazmovies, on bank holidays, we're going to do a historic video. The historic video that we're doing this Easter Monday is going to be looking at 1917. So we're going to focus on the severe winter of 1916-1917. We'll also have a look at the summer of 1917 as well. So a lot to get through in the video. And at the end, we'll have a look at some pictures as well. Now, what we have to remember about this period is that we're in the midst of the Great War, the First World War that broke out in 1914 and ended in 1918. So that the charts we're going to look at, of course, are significant in terms of the weather, but you have to consider that whilst this weather was going on, there was also a war taking place over on the continent. And, of course, it was a very nasty war. There was people in trenches during this freezing cold winter, and then this shockingly wet, eventually shockingly wet summer. So we're going to have a little bit of a more somber tone, I think, for this particular historic video compared to most of the historic videos that we do. And the pictures are going to be reflective of the conditions that the soldiers were living in, fighting in, and dying in during that period through 1917. So a little bit different for today's historic video, but I hope you enjoy it. Just say about the charts that we're using, they are coming from the historic archive at weathercentral.de. We couldn't do the historic videos that we do at Gazmovies without the historic archive of charts from weathercentral.de. While away many a happy hour on a wet bank holiday Monday, cold wet bank holiday Monday at Weather Central, as I indeed have done myself. You'll also hear a lot of information in this video that's come from Trevor Harley, and Trevor Harley has a personal weather website. Most of the information you hear in these historic videos, particularly ones that are a very long time ago, because it's okay for the more recent ones, because I can remember them myself, but the ones that are a long time ago, this is, we're talking about a century ago for this particular video, ones that are a long time ago, all the information really is coming from Trevor Harley's website. Now, the problem is there isn't, in some instances, a huge amount of information to go on, so I'm going to have to interpret the charts. These ones that are a very long time ago are always a little bit difficult for me to do. So they're the two websites that we couldn't do the historic videos that we do at Gazmovies without. It's weathercentral.de and Trevor Harley's personal website. Big thank you to both of those websites, and of course you can find the links to them on the links page. And just say, hope you enjoyed the video. It's going to be a long one, of course, because it's a historic video, got a lot of years to cram in, but I hope you enjoyed it. If you can't watch it all in one go, it's no problem, because it's going to be kept within the historic archive of videos at Gazmovies indefinitely, so it'll always be here at website to look back on and come back and see what you think, pick it up, perhaps you have to leave off at any point. Right, with that said, we're going to start in November 1916. Now, to give you a bit of heads up about the kind of information I have to work with, all that Trevor Harley says about November 1916 is that it has a CET central temperature of 6.8, and that's all I have to work with. But obviously, with a central temperature of 6.8, it's not an overly cold November. There's no real sign at this point in this month of the freezing cold and severe winter that is to emerge. So here we are on the 1st of November 1916. We're bringing in a westerly flow. It was quite mild, wet and windy. We go through to the 4th and on into the 5th of November. It's actually turning quite stormy. This area of low pressure down to the southwest of the country, probably throwing up copious amounts of rain. We've also got severe gales pushing up from the south as well. These very unsettled conditions continue into the 6th, and then on up towards the 10th. It's remaining unsettled, although pressure's rising a little bit down to the south of the country. A long southwesterly is pushing up here as well, so very mild air is being drawn up out of the Azores there on the 10th of November. 1916. This looks very mild. On the 12th, we've got high pressure down to the south of the country, ridging through Spain, going into France and central parts of Europe, with low pressure out to the northwest. It's probably very wet in the northwest of Scotland, but most parts of the country would be dry. Of course, have to consider we've got very poor air quality. It's before the Clean Air Act, so there's lots of coal fires and chimneys churning out copious amounts of soot. So any sort of anticyclonic ridge in November is probably going to be producing fog. So although this looks as though it should be a very mild scenario, and this occurred now on the 12th of November 2017, for example, it would be a very mild day. But back then, there might have been a lot of smog and fog underneath that ridge across England and Wales. It's always very difficult to say, but I suspect there would have been a limit to the temperature due to fog. And that ridge just extends up through the country, actually, as we go through to the middle part of November 1916. We're taking that ridge up towards eastern and northern parts of Scotland. So beginning to show signs of trying to get the high pressure north. That's interesting. We start off there on the 12th with high pressure to the south of us in a firmly mild sort of scenario, except if there's smog going on. But that high pressure is then ridging north, which is quite an unusual thing for high pressure to do in November. So that is a little bit indicative of the fact that the weather pattern is perhaps behaving a little bit abnormally here. The high pressure then goes to Scandinavia, so we're trying to bat the winds into the east. We're trying to set up our first cold spell of the, it's going to be a very cold winter of 1916-1917, was actually the joint third coldest winter on record. So we move through into the second half of the month, and we've got low pressure trying to come in off the Atlantic here on the 17th of November 1916. But we've also got the high pressure over Scandinavia, so there's a real battle taking place between these two conflicting air masses. And what we see, what we see is that eventually this trough is going to lose the battle. It starts to get pushed out to the south and the west of the country as the high pressure of Scandinavia begins to turn the winds into the east and into the southeast as well. So it's beginning to drag in colder air from the east with the upper air temperature. It's only November, so not going to deep cold pool, but certainly colder air is starting to be dragged in from the east. And then we've got low pressure here on the 19th of November 1916 to the south of us. That's producing heavy rain. And we've also got this strong and cold easterly wind. So on the northern edge of this low pressure, we're probably producing quite a lot of snow. And that would be most likely across northern England, possibly southern parts of Scotland as well. Then as we move out beyond that to the upper air temperatures on the 19th, you can see that we've got these cold upper air temperatures to the north, indicating that we probably would have snow there through northern parts of England and into Scotland. But further south, it actually looks relatively milder. And those milder upper air temperatures are beginning to win the battle, I should say, as we go into the 20th of November. Low pressure firmly anchored across the top of the country there on the 20th of November 1916, producing lots of heavy rain and showers. Most of the cold air now has gone to the north. So just a little brief sort of teaser, really, of what's coming. And that is very often what you find before a really cold, very cold or a severely cold winter. You often do find that sometime around November, early December, you'll tend to get just a bit of a tease, a bit of a heads up that things aren't quite right with the atmosphere. They don't last, they very quickly revert back to milder conditions. But just for a time, the atmosphere seems to give us just a little bit of a indication that things are not right. So we go through to the 22nd and then on to the 23rd, and clearly we're going back to milder conditions. So that brief heads up about what's going to happen in a couple of weeks' time, that's gone, and we're back into milder west-southwesterly winds. And these milder conditions then see us through to the end of November 1916. We've got high pressure to our south and southeast, got low pressure to the north, and we're firmly in a mild, flat westerly flow. And that's how we go into the 1st of December 1916 also. Now, the 1st of December 1916 has a central temperature of just 1.9 degrees, very cold month, and it was the coldest December of the century until 1933. Part, as I say, of a very cold winter, the third equal coldest winter on record. We're starting off on quite a mild note, but again, anytime you see a ridge, and it is a mild ridge, so again, if this happened now, after many decades after the Clean Air Act, if this happened now, it will probably be a very pleasantly mild winter's day. Back in 1917, you have to consider that under this ridge here, despite the fact it's a mild air mass technically, if there's smog, if there's soot being pumped out into the sky, then chances are there might be fog and smog, and that would make things a lot colder. So these mild-looking charts, they possibly back then aren't as mild as they would be if they occurred now. Right, run through to the 3rd of December 1916, and that ridge is beginning to break apart as low pressure is starting to push down from the north and west. That low pressure dives through the North Sea on the 4th of December, and winds are going to the north. So this is our first northerly shot. Had been an easterly back in November. Now this is our first sort of northerly shot, and going to be a lot more of these to come over the coming months. So we here on the 5th of December 1916, we've got low pressure sitting in the North Sea. The winds are in from the north and the northeast. It's a cold air mass, and this low pressure, but centred over the low countries of the North Sea, is probably bringing in snow showers, or maybe in some longer spells of snow, to eastern parts of the country. Out in the west, it's mostly dry, but it's cold and frosty under that ridge to the west. Now go through to the 6th, and you notice pressure is ridging through the country and heading up towards Scandinavia. So the Siberian High, which is actually right up here in the far top right-hand corner of the chart as you're looking at it, the Siberian High is already exerting its influence here on the 6th of December 1916 down into Scandinavia. And we are bringing in the flow in from the east. So this is a cold, probably quite bitterly cold day, especially so down in the south with a risk of snow showers. On the 8th and then into the 10th of December, we find things turning much more unsettled. So you notice this area of low pressure that we have here around Iceland on the 8th of December. Look where it goes by the 10th of December. It's diving southwards across the country. Bitterly cold air is on its northern edge, and that's plunging down into Scotland and Ireland in particular. This is probably bringing heavy rain to southern parts of the country, although bear in mind it was cold before it, so there could be a mix of rain and snow in the south. And it's probably bringing quite a lot of heavy snow to Scotland and Northern Ireland. We move through to the 12th of December, and it looks firmly cold and unsettled. It's not a very cold air mass, the very coldest of the air, these north-northeast winds actually going down into the Atlantic, but it's probably enough to be producing snow here across many parts of the country within this area of low pressure. Up to the middle part of December, and you see with the upper air temperatures, we're not talking about severely cold air at this point. It's not desperately cold. It's still early in the winter, but it's probably cold enough for snow, particularly for northern parts of the country. In the south, probably more of a wintry mix of these areas of low pressure, more or less stationary over the country. I would have thought producing a fair amount of heavy rain, snow on the northern edge. But notice that the broad pattern is very abnormal for the middle of December. We've got this ridge in the northern Atlantic. It's extending up to Greenland, and then it's actually going further north of that and extending back into the Siberian/Arctic high. So quite an unusual pattern here for the middle of December. 15th of December, again, there's that ridge through the middle of the Atlantic going up to Greenland. Low pressure is through the UK, and these cold northerly winds are digging in. I suspect it's turning increasingly cold, with even in the south the rain turning to snow. Very blocked setup there on the 16th of December. Proper Greenland blocking in over Greenland and Iceland. Low pressure is underneath it. I think, again, that's quite a cold air mass, particularly so for the north, with snow being produced by those areas of low pressure. The 17th pushes those pressures down to the south and the east, properly opening the door to north-northeast winds. That's a real northern blocking feature that's in there across Greenland on the 17th of December, and the winds are blowing in from the north and the northeast. That looks very snowy because we've got a cold air mass across the country, and yes, low pressure is forming within that cold air mass, so I think there would be quite a lot of snow across many parts of the country. Again, haven't got a huge amount of information to work with there, but that does look like it could be particularly snowy there on the 19th of December. Cold air mass is through the country. Again, it's not severely cold, but it's cold enough, certainly, to be producing snow. Now, we get a little bit of a reprieve then as we go up towards Christmas. We find milder air beginning to push up from the southwest. So probably here on the 21st, we've got some sort of snow event, and then eventually it's beginning to turn milder, especially in the south. And that takes us into what is a relatively mild Christmas. So this is Christmas Eve, 1916, and the flow is back in from the west. The air's coming off the Atlantic. The cold spell, for the time being, is over. Christmas Day, 1916, looks very unsettled. This area of low pressure, I would have thought, is producing a lot of heavy rain. And we keep unsettled conditions going through into Boxing Day as well. This is the 28th of December, 1916. Again, the air's pushing up from the southwest, so it looks relatively mild with outbreaks of rain, particularly in the north and west. And then that takes us up to New Year's Eve 1916, when again we're in a mild scenario. We've built the ridge up across Siberia, we've got low pressure out to north and west, so quite clearly we're ending 1916, we're ending December on a mild but probably quite wet and windy note. So we start 1917 on a mild note as well. This is the 1st of January 1917, where we're dragging up the air from the Azores. Again, a classic sort of mild scenario. Just going to show you, even back 100 years ago, the high pressure from the Azores was still there, and it's still ridging into France and Spain. And yes, the southwesterly winds are still pumping up those mild temperatures from the Azores. These mild conditions continue briefly into the opening days of January 1917. But this is another cold month. It has a central temperature of 1.6 degrees, the coldest January of the Great War, of the First World War. And in fact, it gets so cold that the River Mersey partly freezes during this month. So although we're starting it on a very mild note, obviously it's going to turn much colder. And that begins to happen from the 6th of January 1917 as we begin to dig the air in more from a northerly part of the Atlantic. This ridge is starting to pull back into the central part of the Atlantic, and the jet stream is beginning to dig south as well. Notice very deep cold pool is in across Scandinavia. That's often a sign that something is going to happen. The 7th and then through to the 8th of January 1917, still relatively mild, but a deep area of low pressure is developing across the country here on the 8th of January, and that's starting to turn the winds into the north once again. So colder air is starting to push back in from the north as this low pressure by the temp is clearing into central parts of Europe. Although we're still more or less in an Atlantic setup, the high pressure is still there. It's now off the coast of Portugal, and it's back into the Azores. Although it's there, we're in a cold air mass actually, because this low pressure is slipping into Central Europe and it's turning the winds into the east-northeast. This is probably bringing snow into eastern parts of the country here on the 10th of January 1917. Look at the upper air temperatures. Despite the fact that the high pressure is only a little way to our west, the upper air temperatures are cold. Colder than anything, actually, that we saw during December. So the -10 ice firm is digging through the country, telling us that we've got some bitterly cold air plunging down through the UK. Low pressure sits over the country on the 11th of January 1917. That's probably producing quite a lot of snow. And then that low pressure moves into the North Sea on the 12th, again pulling the winds in from the north. Now what happens with this low pressure as it runs down the North Sea, there it is on the 12th, here it is on the 13th. What happens as it runs down the North Sea is it intensifies. There's a lot of cold air wrapped around this low pressure, so this is producing heavy snow. Outbreaks of persistent heavy snow, possibly blizzard conditions, are plunging down the country with this area of low pressure. This is also affecting, of course, many parts of continental Europe, so France into Belgium, Holland, those areas being affected by heavy snow where the war is taking place as well. The 14th of January 1917 looks very cold. We've got high pressure out to our north and west. We've got low pressure down to the south and southeast. The winds are in from the north and northeast. So the low pressure is there providing the precipitation. The northeasterly winds are providing the cold air. That's a perfect recipe for heavy outbreaks of snow. And I think there would have been a lot of snow through this middle phase of January 1917. We move into the upper air temperatures again. They're looking cold, not severely cold, but certainly cold enough to be producing snow. And I would have thought daytime temperatures with this kind of a setup in January are struggling to get above freezing. Strong, cold, bitter northeasterly winds there on the 15th of January, producing probably quite a lot of snow. Into the 16th, it remains cold. High pressure is trying to build over Scandinavia, but wind remains from the east, a real easterly. On this day, 16th of January 1917, we actually get 5 inches of snow falling across Newquay and parts of southwestern England. So a real blizzard taking place down in the south. Things we keep it cold, things remain cold up to the 20th of January 1917, a real easterly wind then setting up, probably losing the snow risk to some degree, but that looks a proper bitter easterly wind that we're bringing in there on the 20th of January. A lot of dry weather with that, I would have thought as well. And then we keep these largely anticyclonic conditions going through to the latter stages of the month. So this is 26th of January 1917, where again the high pressure is firmly in there over Scandinavia, but winds are from the east-southeast. Remember, the continent is covered with snow, so any air that's coming in either from the east or the southeast, or probably even from the south, is going to be really bitterly cold air. The only truly safely mild wind direction in this kind of a winter is going to be west or southwesterly. Anything else is likely to be cold. So it's pretty dry here on the 26th of January 1917, but bitterly cold with those southeasterly winds. And those really cold winds continuing to the end of the month. This is the upper air temperatures for the 28th of January 1917. Notice a very deep cold pool there across Germany. Severely cold air is to our east, and that actually begins to push westwards on those easterly winds as we go through into the end of January. Notice the upper air temperatures are turning colder and colder as these easterly winds drag that bitterly cold air in from a long way east. It's fully isobars back. The air actually is originating here from northern parts of Russia. So a real Siberian blast is now moving in here on the 30th of January 1917. And that's how we end January 1917. Bitterly, bitterly cold. Easterly winds dragging in snow. Lots of heavy snow showers. And look at those upper air temperatures. Really cold, especially so the southeastern parts of the country have the upper air temperatures going down to minus 15 at 850 HPA. So you'll be talking about maximum temperatures here below freezing, probably no better than -2, -3, -4 degrees, with snow coming in from the east as well. Into February, the final month of this severely cold winter, February has a central temperature of just plus 0.9 degrees, so it's a very cold month, also a very dry month. Often do find that combination when you have it cold, you'll tend to have it quite dry as well. It's the coldest month of the Great War, as well as, of course, being the coldest month of this particularly cold winter. There's severe frost through the first 3 weeks of this month, February 1917. So we started with loads of blocking across Greenland and Iceland. The winds are in from the north and northeast. Well, pressure's quite weak in the south, so I would have thought there's likely to be a fair amount of snow. Look at those upper air temperatures, a real big freeze taking place, not just in the UK, but many parts of Europe. Freezing cold and deeply snow-covered as well. Remember those people living and fighting and dying in the trenches while this is going on. What horrendous conditions they must have been, that they experienced during that horrible First World War. We move through to the 3rd of December 1917 and the 3rd of February 1917, I should say. And low pressure again, it's spilling down from the north. That's probably bringing outbreaks of snow as it comes down across the country through the UK from the 3rd to the 4th. That's a snow event taking place there. Within the cold air, we've got outbreaks of snow. We get through to the 5th of February 1917 and the winds are still in from the north. It's still cold. Got low pressure on the eastern side of the country now, so this does look very wintry indeed. Now this day, the 7th of February 1917, records a maximum of just -5 degrees. I'll say it again, a maximum of -5 degrees at Benson and Ross on Wye. So a really cold day. The mild westerly winds are trying to re-establish, but my word, it would have been jolly cold under that ridge that's sitting across the UK and backing into Scandinavia as well. Look at the upper air temperatures. They've actually lifted up a little bit in terms of the upper atmosphere, but down on the surface, we've got a lot of snow, remember, and it would be very cold. Now, there's not a huge amount happens for the rest of February 1917. We have high pressure dominating through much of the month, so this is indicative really on the 8th of February. Lots of high pressure, freezing cold, very frosty. Daytime temperatures probably trying to get above freezing. And remember, of course, again, high pressure is there, so with the poor air quality that we've got going on, all of the sort, the big chimneys churning out those cold fires and all that smoke and soot. There's likely to be lots of fog under this area of high pressure we see here on the 10th of February 1917. That high pressure is pulling out to our west on the 12th, so a little bit of retrogression taking place there. That's where we take pressure from west to, take pressure from east to west as opposed to the normal zonal flow, which is west to east. And pressure is weakening in the south again, so there's probably some snow coming through with that. However, by Valentine's Day 1917, the high pressure is back in again, so very quiet but very cold, frosty, and those quiet, frosty conditions take us into the second half of the month as well. The Atlantic's trying to break through there on the 18th, but by the 22nd we see that we're still more or less in the block setup. Still high pressure, though it's quite weak, is to our east-northeast, and the winds are still coming in from an easterly direction, so it remains cold and frosty. Now, at the end of the month, we do begin to see a little bit of a change. That high pressure starts to slip back in towards eastern parts of Europe. We begin to bring the air up from the southwest, and we have a mild end to what has been a very cold winter. So the closing days of the winter of 1916, 1917, and the closing days of February 1917 are a good deal milder. That's how we end the month on the 28th of February 1917 on an Atlantic-driven and fairly mild note. But is that the end of the cold weather? I can tell you most certainly no, it isn't. So we go through to March 1917, and what we're going to find is that very quickly cold air is going to come back. So March 1917 has a central England temperature of just 3.2 degrees. Only 1962 would be colder than this March during the 20th century. We're starting on a relatively mild note with winds coming off the Atlantic, but by the second, notice already we've got high pressure rising to our northeast, heights building to the northeast. By the third, look at that, we begin to block off the Atlantic again. That high pressure over Scandinavia beginning to bat the winds into the east, and most of the continent is still freezing cold and snow covered. Look at that. The 5th of March starts to look quite severe all of a sudden. That very mild start to the month that we had is a really dim and distant memory. We've got 1,040 millibar area of high pressure across Scandinavia. We've got low pressure down to the southwest, and the winds are coming in from an east-southeasterly direction. And those winds then turn easterly on the 7th. So we've got heavy snow down to the southwest from this area of low pressure, and then these east-southeasterly winds are bringing in bitterly cold air, sub-zero air from the east, and probably they're very strong winds producing lots of heavy snow showers as well. Look at the upper air temperatures, how cold the upper air temperatures are across central parts of Europe. And those severely cold upper air temperatures are heading our way. On the 8th of March 1917, we're in a severely cold easterly wind screaming in from the Urals. Look at the upper air temperatures. Minus 15 isotherm there is through northern and eastern parts of the country. Minus 20 850 HPA is coming across the North Sea. That's bringing in copious amounts of snow, and that's so be drifting and blowing around in those gale force easy winds. Imagine the wind chill. And just again, look at that chart and imagine having to be living in a trench, snow covered, frozen, and well, it must have been absolutely horrendous for the people that were fighting during the First World War in those appallingly cold conditions. That's how the upper air temperatures look on the 9th of March 1917. Again, freezing cold across most parts of northern Europe. Low pressures clearing into the east, taking one star event away. More low pressures waiting in the Atlantic to bring another snow event. So the 10th of March 1917 starts to try and push milder air up from the southwest, but of course it's coming into that cold air, so you would assume there's a snow event taking place, and by the time you get through to the 15th, we've still got high pressure to the north of Scotland. We're still more or less bringing in the air in from the east-northeast, so it remains really cold. The mild Atlantic air is kept at bay a long way from us. Now it's March, so we're going into spring, and things do begin to get a bit milder here on the 18th. Finally, we're raising the heights again, something we've not seen really since the start of the year. We're raising heights again through Biscay and into France and Spain, which is starting to drag in much milder air from off the Atlantic. So finally, we get a thaw. It doesn't last all that long, because by the 20th, that high pressure is pulling back into the Atlantic, and yes, the winds are going into the north and the northeast. Again, this is bringing another cold shot down across the country, probably bringing yet more snow with it too. That's how we look on the 22nd of March. High pressure out to the northwest, low pressure is through Central Europe. The winds are in from the northeast. So that milder interlude that we had just for a day or so, that's gone. It's a dim and distant memory. We're back into freezing cold conditions once again, with more snow, I would have thought, in eastern parts of the country. And then high pressure ridges through the country. We're in a cold air mass, so you get night frost, but I think by day, of course, the sun's getting a little bit stronger, so probably a little bit less cold by day. However, by 26th, yes, you've guessed it, the winds are back into the north. Yet again, another northerly shot is coming down. 29th brings milder air in from off the Atlantic, but by the 31st, we end March 1917. You've guessed it, on a cold note, the winds are back in from the north once more. And then that takes us through to a very cold start to April 1917. April 1917 is the coldest April on record, with a centering temperature of just 5.4 degrees. There's not a colder April within the CET index. MAD index goes back to 1659. So here we are on the 1st of April 1917, and winds are in from the north again. Bitterly cold air plunging down across the country. Lots of heavy snow showers coming down with that too. We get through to the 2nd. Again, it looks very cold, doesn't it? High pressure is out to the north and west. Low pressure is over and to the east of the country. Follow the ice bars back. The air's originating from the Arctic quite clearly, plunging down. The morning of this day, the 2nd of April 1917, actually has a minimum temperature of minus 15 degrees at Newton Rig in Cumbria. Minus 14.4 degrees is also recorded in Eskdalemuir on the same night. There's notable snowfalls taking place, of course, with these northeasterly winds. And these cold conditions and very wintry conditions continue through the first half of April 1917. Low pressure just sitting over the country within this cold air mass, producing lots and lots of snow. Another low pressure is plunging in from the northwest here on the 8th. That runs down the North Sea on the 10th, again bringing the winds back into the north. Yet another northerly shot as this low pressure runs down the North Sea and provides the energy for snow. The first half of April 1917 was particularly bad, with heavy snow, especially in the west, and particularly affecting Western Scotland and Ireland, perhaps rather unusually. We move through to the 11th, and we have a minimum temperature of minus 13.3 at Braemar on the 11th. So if we just run on, that's the scenario that produces that temperature minus 13.3. Again, look how blocked it is there across Greenland with the low pressure to our east and the winds as blowing in from the north and from the northeast. So these very cold conditions with northerly winds continue into the middle part of April. So not only have we had a really cold winter with loads of snow, now it's dragging on and on and on into the spring. What horrendous conditions they must have been. Now we go through to the second half of the month, and finally things begin to get a little bit milder. So here we are on the 19th of April, finally starting to break the Atlantic through. Milder air is beginning to push in. And then we have a very different pattern, really, as we go into the second half of the month. High pressure is just sitting close to the UK, but the air coming around this high pressure isn't overly cold. So finally spring begins to get underway. We start to thaw out the frozen ground and the snow. However, there's a little bit of a steam tail right at the very end of the month as the high pressure begins to pull back into the Atlantic. We start to dig the winds in from the northwest again. That does start to bring some wintry conditions back to Scotland right at the very end of the month. But we don't go back into a truly sort of cold and blocked setup. So we've had many months now of freezing cold conditions and snowy conditions. Guess what's going to happen next? We go through to May 1917, and we have a really warm month. We have a central temperature, wouldn't you believe it, of 12.8 degrees, very significantly larger average. It's fine and warm, Trevor says, but with many thunderstorms. So I'll just run you through quite quickly, and you see that we have high pressure here. It's still really to the north of the country on the 6th of May, but it's a much warmer air mass now. We've lost all the snow cover across the continent. We've thawed out the ground. So although high pressure is still blocking, the air mass is not overly cold. On the 12th, we're actually dragging up some really warm air from the south, probably with thunderstorms. This looks very thundery on the 15th of May, 1917, for example. High pressure's back over Scandinavia by the 18th, so we're not all that far away from the pattern that gave us that freezing cold winter. But now, of course, it's a different feel because the air is much warmer across the continent with these easterly, southeasterly winds. This low pressure around Biscay, again, probably producing quite a lot of thundery rain. That looks thundery on the 21st. High pressure over Scandinavia, winds are from the east, but this low down in the south probably producing heavy rain or thunderstorms through southern parts of the country. And then we're hinting at a bit of a heat wave at the end of the month. We've got high pressure building across France and Spain. But air's beginning to drag up from the south, so that does look like a bit of a heat wave scenario right at the end of the month. High pressure's going to our east, there's low pressure pushing up from the southwest. That's a classic thunderstorm scenario for the closing days of May 1917. I would have thought temperatures here are probably going into the 80s Fahrenheit, although, again, very thundery type conditions with these slack areas of low pressure. That's how we finish the month, May 1917, on a more mobile Atlantic-driven note. So we go through into the summer of 1917, and this is a classic front-loaded summer. It's why I'm continuing, really, with this and not cutting it off and April, because it's very interesting some of that we have here. We start off really warm, if not hot, through June, and we're going to end up with an absolutely horrendous August. So June 1917 has a central England temperature of 15.2. Very warm month, but also lots of heavy thunderstorms as well during this month. We're starting off with a southwesterly wind, so quite unsettled to begin, but very quickly we find the high pressure ridging through the country. So by the 10th of June, for example, this would produce lots of hot and dry weather. I would have thought temperatures again going above 80 Fahrenheit here on the 10th of June 1917. As we move through into the middle part of the month, we actually get our hottest spell of the summer. So again, we got the high pressure down to the southwest, to the south of us, and ridging up towards Scandinavia. Low pressure out to the northwest, but winds again dragging up from a southerly southwest direction. That high pressure intensifies as we go through into the 15th. I say this is bringing us our hottest spell of the summer as the winds turn southerly. We're pumping up a proper Spanish bloom, hot air coming out of Spain, going over Biscay and up into country. Just a couple of months before, we was frozen and snow covered, but now we're seeing temperatures going up to 34 degrees. 34 degrees was recorded here on the 17th of June 1917. That's into the 90 Fahrenheit, around 93 Fahrenheit, something like that. But of course, with that kind of heat, not going to be very long before the thunderstorms begin to break out, and those thunderstorms were really quite bad indeed. In fact, as we look at Camden, for example, Camden Square has 70 millimetres of rain from thunderstorms. There's 118 millimetres of rain recorded at Kensington around this time, 16th, 17th of June 1917. So very hot, but very thundery with some severe thunderstorms indeed. A little bit more cooler and mobile then. It's going to the second half of the month. This is 24th of June. Again, westerly winds are coming in, so it's much cooler, fresher, with lots of heat wave, and it looks a little bit more unsettled. We end June 1917 on quite an unsettled note, actually. So we start to bring low pressure in from the south, and on this day, the 28th of June 1917, down at Somerset, we record 215 millimetres of rain. Trevor says in Somerset, the rain began late in the afternoon on the 28th, peaked in the middle of the night and continued until midday on the 29th. 215 millimetres of rain nearby in Quantox, I think that is, and 150 millimetres of rain at Street, Glastonbury. So you wouldn't be wanting to have a Glastonbury festival while that's going on. Needless to say, with such an amount of rain, we saw really quite severe flooding. So this low pressure coming up from the south and the southwest, that produces really wet weather down in the south on the 28th and the 29th of June before it clears away, and we end June 1917 on quite a settled note. Go through to July 1917. It has central temperature 16.1, the warmest month of the summer, but that's about average really in terms of a modern July in any case. It isn't the very warm month that we have in June. High pressure is close to the country through the first half of the month, although we do have some low pressure to our east on the 10th, perhaps producing rain in the east, but generally a lot of dry weather through the first part of July 1917. Winds are pushing back up from the south here on the 14th, producing another little mini heat wave, but that one very quickly is broken down as cooler air starts to move in from the Atlantic. Still nothing really unsettled though until the very closing days of the month, where you see low pressure is starting to get its act together to the north and the west of the country, and then we begin to find things turning more unsettled through to the very end of the month, and this area of low pressure starts to develop to our south on the 29th. becomes quite a major feature on the 30th, pushing up from the south and southeast, bringing some really wet weather to England and to Wales as well. That's how we end July 1917, looking quite unsettled. The winds are back in from the northeast again, you'll notice, and this low pressure to the east probably producing a fair amount of heavy rain. And then we go through to the final month of the summer, and the last month that we can look at in this video, which is August 1917. And it's an atrocious month. It's the second wettest August of the 20th century, I think only beaten by 1912. Has a centering temperature of just 15.3, so it's really cool, really wet as well. The month began with over 53 hours of rainfall in Canterbury, continuous rain from 6:30 p.m. on the 30th of July to 12:20 p.m. on the 2nd of August. Again, courtesy of this low pressure, but sitting to our east, so continuously wet, for over 200 millimetres of rain. In some places, 265 millimetres of rain was recorded at St Thomas Hill in Canterbury. So here we are on the 4th. Again, low pressure is anchored over the country, producing copious amounts of heavy rain. The 4th of August 1917 has 144 millimetres of rain in 1 week, up to the 4th at Margate. And a thunderstorm on the 5th gave 62 millimetres of rain at somewhere called Halstead in Essex, with severe flooding in Saffron Walden as well. That low pressure is near stationary through those opening days of August 1917. We tried to raise pressure a little bit there on the 7th over Scandinavia. That doesn't come off. Look at this low pressure sliding in across the country, producing yet more copious outbreaks of rain, and we keep it very wet then as we're going through into the middle part of the month, with low pressure anchored over the top of the UK. Really, really wet conditions up to the middle, and then into the second half of the month it continues to be very unsettled. Starts to look rather autumnal as we get through to the 22nd of August 1917. Low pressure beginning to come in from the Atlantic with a mobile type Atlantic driven pattern beginning to set up. Look at that on the 24th of August, with copious amounts of rain, severe gales as well coming in around this area of low pressure. That's a proper autumnal storm, and these weather systems are affecting the continent as well. So in those trenches, after all of the snow and the ice, freezing cold temperatures earlier in the year, now we're having to contend with flooded trenches, and of course you know what that means, what it meant trench foot, unfortunately for quite a few people, in those soggy, sodden and filthy trenches. And then we end August 1917 still looking really unsettled, and classic front-loaded summer. June was good, but by August it is looking very, very poor indeed. Look at that on the 28th of August 1917, with heavy rain, severe gales, flooding rains across the country. Atrocious conditions to close out the summer of 1917. That is our final chart on the final day of summer and of August 1917, looking distinctly autumnal, with the air coming in from the west and from the southwest too. And that's it. That's our look at the year of 1917. Hope you found it interesting and informative. Certainly a very extreme year in terms of those frozen and snowy conditions earlier in the year, and then really quite a hot spell through May and particularly June, and then a rapid deterioration in the second half of the summer to those atrociously wet and autumnal conditions that we had in August 1917. What a contrast between June and August, and a very unusual year. Well, the last thing that remains is to leave you with some pictures, and I wanted the pictures for this video to be reflective of the First World War that is taking place in the midst of all of this weather. So the final pictures that I'm going to leave you with are from the trenches and from the battlefields of the First World War. And all that remains is to say thanks so much for tuning in on your Easter Monday, and remember the video catch up website indefinitely, so if you couldn't watch it all in one go, you can come back and watch it whenever you want. Hope you enjoy the rest of your Easter bank holiday Monday, and I'm going to leave you with some pictures. I want to leave you with a little verse as well, and I hope that you find these pictures a little bit moving perhaps, and consider what was going on whilst this weather that we've been talking about was taking place. Thanks so much for watching. They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, or the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.